The aim of this paper is to assess theories of group agency and the body politic against recent work by Bruno Latour. By stressing Latour's emphasis on the social as a body that continually needs reassembling, conventional views of the political populace will be shown to remain relevant, yet in need of further analysis, especially in light of contemporary problems. We will begin by looking at Latour's work in reassembling the social, and then transition to surveys of group agency and body politic theories. Finally, we will return to Latour's Down to Earth to begin to think through what the synthesis of these ideas yields for the existential challenge of our time, ecological destruction. In Latour's book, Reassembling the Social, a major emphasis is placed on troubling the notion that the social is something that exists independently of anything else. Latour refers to relations between groups as an ongoing process made up of uncertain, fragile, controversial, and ever-shifting ties. The path towards a more relevant understanding of the social begins by Latour introducing sources of uncertainty into questions of social formation and description. The first source of uncertainty is the ambiguity of the term group. Latour writes that the word group is so empty that it sets neither the size nor the content. So, rather than listing possible groups, according to Latour, we should create a list of elements always present in controversies about groups. The first controversy deals with the problem of representation. To delineate a group, no matter if it has to be created from scratch or simply refreshed, you have to have spokespersons which speak for the group existence. The second controversy states that, quote, whenever some work has to be done to trace or retrace the boundary of a group, other groupings are designated as being empty, archaic, dangerous, obsolete, and so on. It is always by comparison with other competing ties that any tie is emphasized, something which could be likened to the problems of exclusive associations. The third controversy deals with boundaries and population. We read that when groups are formed or redistributed, their spokesperson looks rather frantically for ways to define them. Their boundaries are marked, delineated, and rendered fixed and durable. In Latour's fourth controversy about the study of groups, he identifies the importance of those who study a group for the continued existence of that group. Quote, any study of any group by any social scientist is part and parcel of what makes the group exist, last, decay, or disappear. Latour makes use of a distinction between two ways of viewing groups. Quote, social aggregates are not the object of an ostensive definition, like mugs and cats and chairs that can be pointed at by the index finger, but only of a performative definition. They are made by the various ways and manners in which they are said to exist. If the social is to be assembled, then every hand is needed. The object of a performative definition vanishes when it is no longer performed, or if it stays, then it means that other actors have taken over the relay. Later in Reassembling the Social, Latour directly addresses questions of the body politic. He begins by asserting a difference between, quote, assembling the body politic and assembling the collective, arguing that despite their similarities, the two should be kept apart if they are to succeed at all. The conception of the social as something always already there has thwarted all efforts at defining the odd sort of corporate body that all political activities should remain able to form. Instead, we ought to consider the body politic as something that can only be made through the duty of its members to create the collective. Latour writes that only political action is able to trace by continuous circular movement this virtual and total assembly that is always in danger of disappearing altogether. The question of how to solve the political relations of the one and the many has been confused with another, how to compose the collective. Rather than theorizing how to justify a populace's existence as a political formation according to some model, we ought to take a deep dive into the way groups can be gathered, attributed duties, and achieve tasks. In his conclusion, Latour defines a collective as, quote, a shared definition of a common world, arguing that procedures must be put in place to render it common, or it may fail to be assembled. To understand what Latour lends to body politic theories, a fruitful starting place is with the analysis of the modern state as it appears in the real world. For this task, the work of Michael Oakeshott in On Human Conduct is helpful. He notes that the state is a human composition, always seeking to become an integrated community, set on a common course, and pursuing a common purpose, but has always fallen short of this standard. A historical study of the modern state reveals the flimsiness, rather than the durability of these associations of human beings. Oakeshott uses the distinction between societas and universitas. While acknowledging these terms do not describe anything actually extant, a move Latour would appreciate. Societas in this work is defined as agents who by choice or by circumstance are related to one another so as to compose an identifiable association of a certain sort, tied together by something that might be called loyalty or a moral relationship. The members of the body politic here are tied together in the continuous acknowledgement of the authority of rules of conduct, which Oakeshott conceives of as the outcome of a choice. By contrast, the universitas is a group of persons associated in a manner such as to constitute them a natural person, but in order to avoid the ambiguities of corporate personhood, Oakeshott suggests understanding the universitas as persons associated in respect of some identified common purpose, in pursuit of some acknowledged substantive end, or in the promotion of a specified enduring interest. Here too, membership requires a choice. Turning next to David Runciman's Pluralism and the Personality of the State, the concepts of societas and universitas are further expounded upon, this time with the addition of a Hobbesian framework of the body politic. In the case of a state, a sovereign is a man or assembly of men who, having been authorized by a group of natural persons, has the right to represent the person of them all, that is to say, to be their representative. Hobbes, quoted by Runciman, writes that it is the unity of the representer, not the unity of the represented, that makes a person one. Hobbes's Leviathan, considered as both a metaphorical man and a literal man, requires the ability to perform its own actions, and its parts must be coordinated in the performance of each action. This is different than other body politic theories, which place the sovereign at the head of the person of the populace. In the case of the Leviathan, the sovereign must be part of the body so that the body as a whole can perform its own actions, thus providing the man with neither a fictitious nor an artificial, but what might be best described as a metaphorical natural personality. Because the social body as Leviathan is not a true person, it is hard for it to replicate the living man. Hobbes resolves this issue by asserting that, quote, life is but a motion of the limbs. Runciman reads this as paralleling the life of the machine, which is simply the sum of the activity of its component parts. Later in the argument, we read that the state can be a person, but only if its members are prepared to believe in the personality of the state. To round out our cursory examination of body politic theories, we turn to J.B. Schneewin's work on the divine corporation, wherein the good we are helping to produce must be supremely important, yet far too complex for us to understand. Following the metaphor of the corporation, the supervisor must never make errors regarding the division of labor and must see every possible complication before it occurs. The supervisor must also give all the agents adequate instructions about their tasks. He must assign them jobs within their powers, and he must reward them on the basis of their merits. This supervisor is an omnipotent God. Schneewind argues that this divine corporation model still structures our moral and political conceptions of the world, which we see as a just cooperative venture, despite changes in or departures from the religious underpinnings of that belief. Moving into the group agency and intentionality portion of this presentation, we turn to Gilbert's book, Joint Commitment, where Gilbert asks, how does social unity come about? Gilbert makes use of a distinction between subjectivist and objectivist views. The subjectivist stance relies on the states of the individuals involved in the social body. The downside of this view is that the common bond exists in the minds of the populace alone, and so are considered to be relatively unstable. Therefore, Gilbert rejects the potential of we thoughts to constitute a real unity of the people concerned. The objective basis for we thoughts comes from the social pact, contract, or agreement. The shortcoming of such an approach, according to Gilbert, is that the social contract may be sufficient but not necessary for forming the body politic. Thus, Gilbert argues for joint commitment as the method by which a real unity of them all comes about, and this would be considered an association rather than a mere aggregate. This is stronger than either subjectivist or objectivist positions, as a joint commitment is created by two or more people. All are needed, again, for the termination of the commitment. Thus, no one can unilaterally terminate the commitment. Evidently, there is a sense in which the parties to a given joint commitment are united or bound together. In this way, each member of the social body has certain responsibilities and rights. The member has the responsibility to act as appropriate to the joint commitment and the right to rebuke others for nonconformity. Gilbert rejects the idea that this would require any shared values other than that which creates the commitment. The question becomes how joint commitments can be born into existence. To this, Gilbert answers that a joint commitment or set of joint commitments should be offered that resonates with the joint commitments the populace are already party to, along with their personal aims, values, and so on. Turning now to Pettit's work on group agency, we learned that in order to be considered an agent, a group must display a modicum of rationality in the formation and enactment of their attitudes. Pettit also argues that group agency among human beings does not emerge without effort. Group agents are made, not born. This work that is required in Pettit's view is the work of maintaining rational standards amongst a group. This claim is partially based on the idea that a group which acts irrationally will fail to satisfy its goal or perhaps joint commitment. A successful group agent, however, will be able to coordinate to the extent that it can replicate an individual agent. This is accomplished by subscribing, directly or indirectly, to a common set of goals, plus a method for revising those goals, and to a common body of judgments, plus a method for updating those judgments. The work of Stephanie Collins on the attribution of duties to groups may prove to be beneficial to our analysis of workable conceptions of the body politic with regard to political action. Collins begins with the assumption that only agents can bear duties to perform actions because only agents can act. Collins also assumes that agents form aims by processing reasons for them, that is, by implementing a decision-making procedure. This could be read as a rather high metric then for a group to have duties, but Collins argues that a group can be an agent and therefore have duties through group-level decision-making procedures and the distribution of aim-related instructions to members. If a group can pass these benchmarks, Collins terms it a collective. Collins also keys in on the issue of performability that we saw from Schneewind, writing that if ought implies can and duty implies ability, each member of the group must be able to perform an action alone in order to be ascribed a duty. Often the individual duty of the group member is the duty to perform responsive actions with a view to there being a collective that can reliably address the circumstance. These are individual duties to collectivize. In order for this responsiveness to occur, the individuals must be coordinated or have a shared end. If the potential group in question cannot meet the above metrics, there is an individual duty to transform the group, specifically where responsiveness is insufficient, to transform it into a collective. In her book, Collins takes a stance against the idea that a single unifying project is required for a group agent's continued existence. Collectives can change their unifying projects while retaining their identity, as long as the new project is produced by a procedure that remains roughly consistent with the aspects of the past rational point of view. This stance is partially based on the parallels between group agents and individual human agents, because a human agent does not require a guiding project in order to have duties. Regarding the duties of the members of a group or collective, Collins posits that when a collective fails to do a duty, This implies that a member has failed to do a duty. For Collins, a duty that can be attributed to both individuals and groups is the duty to transform and perform certain actions once transformed, which points to a much more flexible understanding of group agency than we have seen elsewhere in our analysis. Latour's book Down to Earth addresses current political crises such as Brexit and the Trump presidency, and how these are bound up with geopolitics and global economics to describe the political framework in which the ongoing climate catastrophe occurs. Latour terms this the new climatic regime. Latour's solution is to introduce the Earth itself as a new political actor. He writes, "People generally talk about geopolitics as if the prefix geo merely designated the framework in which political action occurs. Yet what is changing is that henceforth, geo designates an agent that participates fully in public life. Humans cannot be considered the only actors, even though they still see themselves entrusted with a role that is much too important for them," which is quite reminiscent, perhaps, of the divine corporation model. Focusing solely on the claims made about the body politic, we learned that if we were to introduce the Earth as a political actor, to do so would create a new way of worlding, in that it aligns with no borders and transcends all identities. In summary, we will briefly compare the work of Latour with the other thinkers we have examined in order to determine what a workable conception of the body politic and group agency might be after being troubled by Latour's work. With Oakeshott, there is a definite agreement with regard to the body politic being a human composition that is flimsy and falls short of community. Oakeshott believes that societas and universitas have use as methods of analysis and descriptions of purpose, whereas Latour would likely contest both of these possibilities. Runciman and Latour agree on the importance of the question of representation for group formation, and Latour would likely support Runciman's estimation of the Leviathan machine as the sum of the activity of its parts, despite Latour's hatred for the Leviathan itself. Schneewin's divine corporation model of massively shared agency parallels Latour's thought about the task of the body politic being bigger than it can handle, especially if this body politic consists of only humans. Turning to group agency conceptions, the theory of joint commitment offered by Gilbert seems to accord entirely with Latour's project in Down to Earth, just with the commitment being made explicit that our task should be to allow the Earth to become a political actor. Pettit's characterization of group agents as being made, not born, parallels Latour's ideas strongly. Collins' work arguably aligns most closely with Latour in her attribution of individual duties to create a group agent. Thus, we might say that applying a Latourian framework to body politic theories renders them inconsistent, leaving behind only scattered claims by these theorists which assert the importance of political action. A Latourian reading of group agency works quite well if those group agency claims involve a duty to the group agent to create the group agent and unite towards a common purpose, such as saving our shared world. In conclusion, in the all-important search to form a global body politic that can respond to the challenge of climate change, I argue that Latour's framework can be fruitfully combined with group agency and body politic theories to highlight the need for political action to form a group, something that is a duty for each potential member. The main point of difference between group agency theory and the work of Latour seems to be the emphasis on rationality, given that Latour's hope of introducing the Earth as a political actor does not work if agency requires rational decision-making. This paper wonders if Collins' calls for transformation by individual group agents so as to increase responsiveness and form the collective might be able to extend an invitation to the Earth to our global group agent whose goal is solving ecological destruction. With this impasse possibly resolved, we must remember Pettit's warning that rationality alone is insufficient for group agency. He seems to worry about a group which is joined together with a goal and utilizes reason, but experiences group acrasia, collective weakness of the will. The real question then is if we are able to resist this corporate acrasia and challenge our preconceptions, so as to form an effective body politic to meet the political challenges of today.